Starting a company, every founder is actually saying three things. It doesn't matter what the business is or what the market is, it's always three things. The first is that there is a serious problem with the status quo. Something is broken, something is missing, the world could be so much better. Second, the founder is saying that this problem cannot be solved by current providers nor by current approaches. The incumbents just don't get it, and you need an entirely new company. And then third, this is the most audacious claim, the founder is saying that everyone else who might try to solve this problem, start their own company, is unworthy to do so, that only I can fix it. And my point is that the founder, by their very nature, is oppositional, discontent, and audacious. She is an insurgent, and her company is an insurgency. Every founder, including all of you in this room, no matter how benign your personality might be, is on the side of upheaval, of tearing something down. And that's a point about identity, right? But there's a second truth, which I'll share with you along the lines of the previous speaker, which is about the odds, which are not favorable. In fact, it's arguable that it's not terribly rational to start a company. And here's one set of the stats for you to contemplate. If you look at all of the US startups that were founded from 1990 onwards, there were about 50,000. This is data from 2024. About 11,300 of them raised $5 million in capital. About half of them raised $20 million. 290, about 5% of them, reached an IPO. And then a fraction of those ended up being worth more than $5 billion today. So roughly somewhere around 1 in every 1,300 companies that went this journey from 1990 onwards got to about a $5 billion market capitalization today. And if you were to look at the data internationally, it would be more sobering still. The number is about 1 in every 14,000 would have made that threshold. Now, you could pick a different time period, you could pick a different threshold, but the point is that any way that you look at it, it's considering a balance between a reckless long shot and a sure thing, you'd have to say it's closer to the former. So, nonetheless, we all try. So I want to use the word improbable rather than reckless and just ask a question, which is, what does it take for one of these reckless or rather improbable insurgencies actually to succeed? And this is the question that my co-founders and I asked 24 years ago over and over, which is, how does the smaller, weaker force defeat the larger, stronger ones that are against it? Now, we know from history that this is possible, but the smaller force can beat the weaker the smaller force can beat the stronger force. It's happened multiple times before. In 480 BC, 7,000 Spartans beat 300,000 Persians in the Battle of Thermopylae. In 480 AD, 6,000 English archers beat 7,000 or 30,000, I believe, French soldiers at the Battle of Agincourt. At its founding, this country beat the most powerful empire in the world, in Great Britain during the Revolutionary War, only to lose 200 years later to the much smaller forces of the NVA and the Viet Cong, right? And in a galaxy far, far away, the Rebel Alliance was able to defeat a fully operational Imperial Death Star. So, if you think about the question, you know that it is possible for that smaller, weaker force to defeat the larger, stronger one. And it's a question that really tormented the six of us, that we were indeed a large founding group when we founded the company that I co-founded in 2001 called Guidewire Software. Now, just to tell you the story at a very rapid flyover pace, the year was 2001. We were starting a company. We had all of the ingredients that you need. We had an idea. We had a lot of development expertise. We had a theory about the market. We had a very intense willingness to defer gratification. We had a garage. We had everything that you think that it might take. But it took only about an hour that first day to realize there's a very fine line between an intrepid band of revolutionaries that will change the world and 6 dudes who were unemployed with a PowerPoint presentation and who were trying to take a very reckless gamble. My company's journey was very arduous. It took a long time. Along the way, many times I longed to quit myself. The kind of TLDR timeline looks like this. We had the concept in 2000. We incorporated the company near the peak of the dot-com boom. At that time, the conventional wisdom is the money is free, the internet is bringing the world together, it's talent that's scarce. Our first day in the office was 2 weeks after 9/11, and now talent was free, the world is a very dangerous place, and nobody was investing. Capital was scarce. The first customer signed 18 months later, then canceled 4 months after that. 3 months later, when we had about 100,000 of our bootstrap funds remaining, we signed customers 2 and 3. We closed a Series A with the only 2 venture capitalists that will take more than 1 meeting with us. And in that glorious moment, we sold half the company for $4 million. It's 4, not 40. It was a sadder time, and that's the number. We had 2 more rounds of funding after that, and that included a Series C from the firm of which I am now part of its partnership, Battery Ventures. We raised a total of $29 million. And then 4 years after that, we had an IPO. And the first day of trading brought us to $1.1 billion in market capitalization. I was CEO for another 7 years from there, transitioning to the chairman role in 2019. And today, the company has $1.2 billion or so in ARR and a market capitalization of about $18 billion. So that's my credential. It's surely the most significant thing that I'll ever accomplish. But the point of this talk is to return to that much earlier chapter before we knew that any of this was going to work out. And for me, that time was characterized by 2 equally strong emotions, a kind of terror and also a kind of rage. The terror was the feeling of a gambler that's kind of all in on one outcome, while the rage is the characteristic feeling of the insurgent who is burning with a question and asking over and over again obsessively, how can my smaller, weaker force defeat the larger, stronger, more established ones that are arrayed against me? And I think founders often don't ask this most obvious and critical question. In fact, I think that sometimes founders forget the answer that they started out their journey with. And that's kind of my point. So what I'd like to talk about, that lest you have forgotten as founders in this audience, I want to remind you of 3 of the characteristic special powers that you have as an insurgent. The first power is to name the enemy. That's what has to be defeated. Unfortunately, capitalism is not a zero-sum game, but insurgency is a zero-sum game. So this is my favorite quote. It's not enough to succeed, others must fail. And the goal is to break the status quo. And anyone invested in the status quo is by definition the enemy. It's important to burn with hatred for that enemy. And it's important to remember that the incumbents don't burn with hatred. They have foosball tables and massages where they work. And life is comfortable. There's no reason to get riled up. But to the insurgent, the enemy is standing in the way of everything that is good and proper. The enemy is indolent. They're unworthy. You want them to suffer disgrace and humiliation. What I always tell founders is, you must want the children of your enemies to go hungry. Now, lest this sound too bloodthirsty, I want to hasten to add that the enemy doesn't have to be a human being. Here is a picture of Guidewire's enemy. It was a remorseless AI killing machine. Actually, that's not what it looked like. It looked more like this. This is the most effective slide that I used over 20 years for every company meeting, every sales meeting would involve a picture of this. And this is our enemy. It was the 1980s era CICS COBOL mainframe core insurance processing system. And we would say that we will not rest until they are all dead and buried. Now, why is it so important to name the enemy? Because it activates the energies of your team. It awakens the tribal instinct to succeed as a group. It renders specific the frame of the contest that you're within. And it forces you to ask every minute, how are we going to beat these guys? Where are we strong and where are they weak? And most importantly, defining the enemy means that you are defining the mission. It's the boundary of what it is that you're aspiring to do. And if you don't have an enemy or you have a vague definition of the enemy, it means that the mission will be vague. And no insurgent can afford to be vague. Now, the second superpower, after naming the enemy, is to define a pure strategy. Now, remember that at its origin, as you all know, a startup has no assets. It has no capital, it has no investors, it has no team, no product, no revenue, no customers, no infrastructure, no references, none of the things that actually comprise a company, right? But it has a saving grace, and that's weightlessness. So the insurgent is not bound by prior conceptions of what the solution has to be, and has no surface area to defend, and can bring all of its energies to bear on the enemy's weakest point, and then can try to exploit that breakthrough. So, what do I mean by pure strategy? It's very simple. There are only two ingredients. There's a diagnosis and there's a plan. The diagnosis is an account of how things are and why they are that way. It's a high-resolution map of the enemy's assets and its vulnerabilities. And the plan is a theory of attack. It could be a new offering that is 10x better for some particular segment of the market. It could be a way of co-opting a segment or a channel that's discontent. It could be some persona that's been neglected and is longing to be made a hero. It could be some combination of these things. But the point is that the plan is defining a vector of attack, right? It's identifying where a breakthrough can be achieved and how that breakthrough can be exploited. And if you have a diagnosis, but you don't have a plan of attack, that's just vacuous. And if you have a plan of attack, but you don't have a diagnosis or an accurate one, then that's just wishful thinking. So what did this look like for my company? In brief, and I'll keep it brief, our diagnosis was that you have a $2.5 trillion industry, and it was crippled by obsolete systems that look like this. They also have crazy IT architectures that look like this, and that these were becoming a structural obstacle to insurance profitability. And if you were an insurer in the early 2000s or in the mid-2000s that was trying to replace that, you had three choices. You could either do in-house development, you could use a mainframe company called PMSC that had about 50% market share, or you could buy supposedly modern solutions from Accenture and SAP that were really just custom development. And our plan was to exploit the structural disadvantages of each of these. And I'll skip over all the details, but essentially we just pounded home the argument that a 21st century insurance operation couldn't possibly be built on the foundation of a software architecture that was that old and that rigid. Now, it's obvious in 2025 that a modern software platform would beat out mainframes and consulting-led custom development, but I can promise you it was not obvious at the time, and that the most successful insurance companies of our time, Geico, Travelers, Progressive, etc., all had a completely different theory of the way that this should look. And we had to get the boundaries of this just right, because if we made it too broad and included life insurance, then we would have built too thin a product. And if we had built it too narrowly, say for a specific segment or only for insurers of a certain size, then we would have run out of market. And that would have, led us to join the graveyard of other dead software companies that had tried to serve this industry but had chosen the wrong strategy. And, during our journey, we couldn't find a single example of a vertical core system that had actually achieved venture scale and delivered a good return to its venture investors. As it turned out, none of these precedents really mattered. What mattered was that we had the right strategy. And it was an insurgent strategy that none of the incumbents could follow. And in its core elements, that strategy was unchanged for about 15 years. So a company can make some bad decisions, it can have some bad hires, it can be unlucky. All those things were certainly true for Guidewire, but it cannot survive a bad strategy. And so as an investor today, I care much more about the clarity and the coherence of the strategy than really almost any other attribute of a potential investment. So you have to name the enemy, you need a pure strategy, and there is one more superpower, and that is to summon people to a cause. It's a cause, you can think of it like a quest, it's a journey, pilgrimage, it's an odyssey, it's a kind of adventure that is defined by its future aspiration as opposed to its present reality. And established companies have long ago forgotten what it is to yearn in this way, while the insurgent should be burning with that passion every day. Now, in the early days of the company, not only did we have no assets, we were also an extremely unglamorous employer. Our dingy office was just a short drive away from the most exciting companies of our time: Google, Facebook, Apple, Salesforce, etc. We served an industry that was like the punchline to a joke about the most boring thing that you can imagine: insurance. And every aspect of the business was extremely difficult. It was very hard to build the product, even harder to sell it, and harder still to implement it successfully. So there was really no way to palliate these truths. So we just embraced them, and we made them part of our identity. And to everyone on the team, we just said, there is no way that we can promise that you will become rich from this adventure, either quickly or at all. What we can promise you, however, is extremely difficult work over an indefinite period of time with no guarantee of success. We're doing something that's a lot harder than climbing a mountain. We're just trying to tunnel right through it, through the rock face. And this is the slide that I would use at every company meeting for over a decade. And occasionally a new team member would say, so Marcus, what's on the other side of the mountain? When do we get there? When is it over? And I would love getting this question because then I get to answer, there is no other side of the mountain. It's just mountain forever. And I hope that you like mountain because that's all we have for you, just mountain. Now, this is a joke, but it was only partially a joke because my founder experience taught me some very surprising things about human motivation. It turns out that shared adversity binds people more than shared success even. And also, shared austerity binds people more than shared abundance. And you can't have a quest when it's just about loving the struggle, right? You have to be investing that towards some higher cause. And so you need a shared purpose, which binds people more than just shared enjoyment. It turns out that people really long to be part of something greater than themselves. And the insurance industry, it turns out, is not only the punchline to a joke. It turns out to be thrillingly relevant to people on the worst days of their lives. You know, if all the hedge funds and venture capital firms were to just disappear overnight, wouldn't be that big a deal. But without insurance, you would have ordinary people who would be exposed to catastrophe. And without an insurance company, they would be devastated by these depredations of a dangerous world, in which terrible things are very improbable in the individual case, but in the aggregate case are really certainties. And so I would say it's our life's work, right, to serve the knowledge workers that provide this essential social service. And it is an outrage that they are so miserably served by these lazy and indolent and unworthy companies and the software that our enemies provide. So again, we'd have shared adversity, we'd had shared austerity, and shared purpose. And these were the crucible in which a startup finds its super motivation. It's also been true of every asymmetric military victory in history. So it's time just for a quick moment of humility. I don't want to convey the impression that we never made a mistake. We made tons of mistakes. In fact, I document them for you here. But we'll try that. Actually, this is not a list of mistakes. This is the Apple end user license agreement. This is what you agree to every time you use your iPhone. But the point was that it's a very long list. We made a lot of mistakes. But what I want to stand before you in concluding is to tell you, is just share with you one example of how it would be possible to succeed where a smaller, weaker force defeated much larger, much stronger ones outside. And it was this triad of inner assets that made all the difference. I started with the same claim that all of you are making, that there is something wrong with the world, and it is personified by this enemy. The current approaches won't work, they're fundamentally broken, and we will deliver a better product as a result of this strategy, and only we can fix it. And that's why we are going to commit with righteous conviction all this unreasonably intense and sustained effort from super talented professionals over a long time. And it seems like this would be so simple. It doesn't take any capital or luck in order to use these assets. It only takes an intention. So surely every founder is using and taking these to the maximum. But what I can tell you, and I'm a VC now, I'm not a founder, is that's not the case. It surprises me, amidst all of the kind of passion and intensity that I see among founders, that they don't exploit these intrinsic endowments of the insurgent. And I urge you to do that. I urge you to ask yourselves, have you really named your enemy? And are you burning with hatred for it? How lucid and explicit is your diagnosis of the market problem? And does it really match reality? Does your strategy still intersect with maximum precision on the headpin of demand? And are you calling your people to righteous purpose every day. And if you're not, then you might not be exploiting the full power of that insurgency. I understand why, because I've lived it. You're distracted with the many exigencies of running your business, of selling, of recruiting. You have annoying investors that are assigning you homework and asking for the metrics that tyrannize you and that are the metrics of whether or not your business is succeeding. And you get distracted by all of the activities of company building, like negotiating real estate and picking out the t-shirt colors and all of that. But I just urge you just to push all of that aside as much as you can, and then to return to the core of your insurgent power, because it's the duty and also the unique power of the founding team to revitalize that every day. So within each of your companies, you have a journey of passionate creation, of insurgent creation. Thank you for all that you're doing, because only you can fix it.